We're good to go.
Fantastic. Welcome, everybody. Thanks so much for watching this session and for allowing us to contribute something to your event today. I'm Jan Johnson. I'm the head of workplace strategy at Allsteel. My team keeps their finger on the pulse of what's going on out there and tries to make sense of all the things that are happening in the world of workplace these days, especially these days, because so much is changing. And I think that's to some extent the purpose of this whole day's worth of events for you all is to expose you to or help again make sense of all the things that are coming at you, whether you're seeking them out or whether you're just getting bombarded by all of this. We're hoping that today we can sort of cover a range of topics that might help establish a way forward. To that end, we thought we'd maybe start with some of the information that we've been gleaning and points of view that we've been hearing based on these sort of statistical things that have come from a number of different sources. We're also dividing this, as you can see, into 3 sections. We think one sort of way to try to make the whole workplace discussion a little more digestible is to talk in terms of these 3 topics: is what's going on with people, what's literally going on with place or space, and then what's technology enabling, especially specific to the workplace. And so perhaps the one in the upper left-hand corner is one of the more interesting ones around burnout and how the pandemic has really exacerbated something that's been a chronic problem for a long time, but it's been even more clear. And you see these statistics around how people's workload has increased, which we know is a telltale for burnout. We'll talk about this a little bit later as well. And that it's really, again, been amplified during this point in time. The second one on that people side of the equation on the left side is, I think, a really good one. And I'm glad to see this stated, is sort of getting over the initial notion that if I can't see them, they must not be working, which is going to have to be debunked for us to be able to continue to work in a distributed fashion, which I think is, as you see in some of these other statistics on the page, something an awful lot of employees and organizations have definitely seen have benefits, and the workers themselves have definitely expressed an interest in continuing. And then obviously on the tech side, I guess the big summary is, there's been a lot of work already in this area around things that help us create better user experiences, but also things that help organizations to understand how the workplace is actually being used, not how we think it's being used, and how that can help inform ways to optimize the space, ways to make sure we're giving people the right things that help them do their jobs, and also help the organization to optimize the use of the portfolio so things aren't sitting empty, or we can add the things that are needed for people to get their jobs done. We're going to talk about 4 major topics today, now that I've sort of set the stage for this. One is about this connection and culture slide you see here. We're going to talk about distributed work. We're going to talk a little bit about the role of resilience and how we respond to that. And then the third piece is now escaping me, but we'll get to it when we get to it. Sorry about that. On the culture and connection side, we want to share with you just a sort of preview of some information that we're happy to get you in more detail at some point in time, or expose you to a presentation around this content. But basically, we've done some initial research several years ago that had pointed out that if you're looking for things that scientifically are proven to correlate to the things you see on the right side, team productivity, individual performance, et cetera, the number one thing that gets you those results is social cohesion. And social cohesion we sort of understand, but we'll talk a little bit more about it here by saying we think it has these sort of 4 dimensions. To the first 2, fairness and authenticity, have a bit to do with how management or leadership behaves towards the organization. Do they say things and then do other things that aren't consistent with what they said? Are they walking their talk or not? Fairness, we're going to explain in a second. And then the second 2, interdependence and belonging, really have to do with how employees sort of perceive their relationships with each other. And again, their place inside the organization. So the interdependence thing is, that it takes a village, that we all now, because of knowledge work much more collaboratively, et cetera. But I'll explain sort of more about each one of these things in turn. So fairness, you see the word at the bottom of the page. Fairness is related very closely to equity, which is sort of on everybody's lips these days. And there's a series of graphics out there. If you were to Google, equity and equality, you would get several versions of this type of graphic, which sort of across the top says, if we think the goal is equality, which is giving everybody the same size bicycle, you can see where it's problematic. But if we think about it in terms of equity, which is how do we support each person's uniqueness, in this case, height and potential, able-bodiedness, then we would create a different set of solutions that can make sure each person can enjoy this activity to the fullest because we've made accommodations for their differences. That's what we're talking about when we talk about fairness, is the equity example, not the equality example. The one size fits all never fits anybody particularly well. And so we want to sort of define fairness as more of the equity sort of solution rather than, again, the equality solution. Authenticity, again, you see the word on the bottom. There are some brands that do a fantastic job of expressing themselves and really living their brand statements. They really do walk their talk, and Patagonia stuck out to us as a really great example of that. You know it the minute you walk into their brick and mortar locations. You can sense it when you get on their website. You can see it through the things that they do like this, which is them actually getting actively involved in the causes they think are compatible with the things they're trying to promote and the things they stand for as an organization. So they speak, they walk their talk. Their actions match their words. And so we think this is a fantastic example of what it is we mean by authenticity. The third, interdependence, again, you see the word at the bottom. For those of you that have seen Apollo 13, you know that the reason those astronauts lived through that experience was the work of their team on the ground, that the team itself had to come together in Houston, figure out how to solve this seemingly unsolvable problem. They were able to get a bunch of people together that just worked their butts off to try to figure this out. They came up with some solutions. One in particular was successful. They saved the lives of all those folks up in space. That's maybe a rather dramatic, but a good example, again, of this notion of interdependence. We need each other to get our work done. We need each other and our particular expertise and specialties to contribute to a holistic solution that wouldn't be possible for any one of us to do by ourselves. And finally, belonging. And this may seem like a weird picture to put up, but if you are old enough to remember the Beatles, or you have heard of them, if you are old enough to have heard of them, or if you have no idea who I'm talking about, they were a very, very, very worldwide phenomena back in the early 50s or 60s. And one of the things that we captured this picture for is that there were 4 members of the band, John, Paul, George, and Ringo. Ringo was the drummer. And the Beatles very deliberately put Ringo up on this pedestal, raised the drum set so that he was perceived as a full member of the band, rather than sort of hiding behind them, not really being able to be seen, drumming away and sort of playing backup, but not necessarily being an integral member of the band. So this was a very deliberate decision on their part to literally bring him up so that he appeared much more a part of the whole process. So the second topic we're going to talk about is hybrid and distributed work. And in that way, we're going to talk a little bit about what we mean by that and sort of how people are thinking about it these days. I hope this is going to make sense to you. I'll walk you through this graphic we've created that helps to sort of define all these things and explain what we're after. Across the top, you see this idea of remote work, of hybrid or flex, and resident or office. We see an awful lot of organizations creating this bell curve and trying to understand, now that they've sort of experienced this remote work and sent everybody home, what might their strategy be to replace or to in going forward, how do they think about how people might work through the office? And so in our experience, this is a sweeping generalization, but we think it's mostly true, is that every organization has perhaps a small percentage of people, by virtue of their job or their circumstances, can work from home the majority of the time. I don't know, pick a number, 95% of the time. At the other end of the bell curve, you get those folks that need to be on site for various reasons. We, for example, in my company have a model shop. the model shop guys can't do their work anywhere else other than the model shop. So if they need to do something in the model shop, they have to go to the office because that's where the model shop is. Other organizations have factories or other sorts of things they're doing that would suggest that they have people who have to be there predominantly, again, pick 90–95% of the time. In the middle, which is the biggest part of the bell curve, these are sort of smaller percentages like 10 to 20, 10 to 20. In the middle, you have all those people that could sort of come and go. They could choose to work from home sometimes. They could choose to absolutely come to the office to do things. But they're the folks that have more choice and more flexibility to decide which things would draw them to the office and when they might stay home to do heads down work or might come to the office to do things again because of the specialized equipment or other people or materials that are in the office. So that's sort of what I'm trying to show with these symbols, these shapes that basically say it depends on the activity as to which strategy you pick. So on the left side of the page, we're defining work as being of roughly 5 different types. They overlap. There's no question. That's why these lines that separate these things are dotted, because these things blend together. But we're sort of saying, if somebody's doing solo heads down work, that's maybe the reason most of these flex people would stay at home. And certainly the opportunity for those that can work from home most of the time are doing it because they're sort of individual contributors. The second piece is sort of what I've already alluded to, that if I have specialized equipment or materials that only exist in the office, I have to go to the office to do those things. And again, some of the folks in the middle may have this choice of doing it that way. And there's obviously folks that, sort of need to be there most of the time, depending on game job function. Then there's this notion around social connection, that we go to the office to see and be around other people, very deliberately, or sort of the happy accident of running into colleagues and friends to catch up, or the members of our team that we want to sort of shoot the breeze with, in addition to sort of getting, work done. And so we're sort of saying that social connection is obviously easier when we're all in the same place. And this sort of other color is to suggest that let's not forget that we want to create this sense of belonging. Remember, we said that was super important for those that are mostly working from home. Coordination, these are sort of 2 kinds of collaboration down here. Coordination is sort of the simpler, more straightforward stuff around sharing information, agreeing to some timelines, doing things that aren't necessarily problem solving, aren't necessarily trying to be hugely creative or innovative, not trying to think of a new solution to a big problem, but things that are more just sharing information and making sure we're all aligned and we all sort of know what's going on. And those, again, can those kinds of conversations don't have to be in person. They could even be asynchronous, meaning they don't have to happen live. And so there's, again, this range of lots of different ways that kind of thing can happen. On the other hand, this type of collaboration, the one on the bottom, ideation, collaboration, development, probably really, I think most people would agree that that's really best face-to-face and live, right? And so this is a great reason to come to the office. It's a great reason to bring the team together, to figure out who else needs to be a part of that discussion. That's something that the office is super, super good at, and that I think we've understood now we miss the most. So if you think about your own situation and what you've been doing for the last year, I hope these 5 things might make sense for you, and you can sort of pick up those that you really do crave the office to help support, and those that you could do by yourself at home or on a Zoom call or in some other way. So it's really trying to just say, as you think about a distributed work strategy, I hope this helps to make it sort of make more sense and not sort of seem to be this, make amorphic thing we don't quite know how to get our arms around. I think if we understand this chart, it sort of helps us to also make some decisions about how the office itself might be changing, because the mix of activities that the office has historically supported may be different. We may be doing a lot more collaborative activities in the office and a lot less heads down work there, for example. So that's the idea here, is thinking about the nature of work, perhaps even doing some good needs analysis with teams to figure out what sorts of activities they typically do. That sort of helps us begin to be a little clearer about how to think about how to plan the office. Related to that, though, too, are some sort of behavioral things. And so we have these 3 examples here. we believe that part and parcel in when we talk about distributed work is this idea of basically giving employees, workers, much more autonomy and choice, giving them the choice of where it is that work can be done in the most conducive way, where that's going to happen best, what kind of circumstances and spaces are going to, be most helpful to that. So we're sort of saying, in terms of what's changing, that workers are going to, by definition, in a distributed work strategy, have more choices and more autonomy to make decisions about where they think that happens best. Having said that, we're going to also suggest that this pattern of the things that I've described on the previous slide is going to make it a little tougher, at least initially, to decide exactly how the office should be designed. Like, how much space should we give over to solo seats? How much space should we give over to team spaces where the teams are doing group work, like needing a war room or a large conference room, a small meeting space so they can Zoom with some colleagues or whatever it might be? And how do we know whether we've got the right combination of community spaces? That's going to be a challenge at first, but we have some thoughts for you. The second topic here is identity. Is if you think about it, I think we all tend to attach meaning to our assigned seat. It represents our place in the company. We have a spot. If any of you remember, forgive me for this analogy, but if you remember Steve Martin's movie, The Jerk, which is pretty old, I apologize for those of you that have no idea what I'm talking about, but there's a point in the movie where he's super excited because he finds that there's been a new phone book delivered. Remember when those used to be on paper and you used to get them delivered once a year? He rushes into the room and he says, "The new phone books are here. The new phone books are here. I am somebody," because he was listed in the phone book. That gave him a sense of validation. I think we do something similar, not trying to make light of it, but I think we do something similar with our workstations. So if we begin to take that away, because it may be in this new model, those solo seats are now free address or hoteled, how do we replace that feeling of connection and a place for me inside the organization? We suggest below that paragraph, this notion of assigned neighborhoods can go a long way to do several things for us, including giving the team and my membership in that team a sense of a clubhouse, a territory that's ours, a place where we're always going to be, the place where I can know my colleagues are going to hang out. So I'm not just showing up at the office and not sure how it's going to work or where I'm going to meet people or where my place is. I have a place because my team has a place that's considered their territory. And there's also a good thing about that in the way that it gives the ability for the team to express its identity, to potentially even use what's called visual persistence, to put things on the wall that help other folks that are passing by to know what the team does, what they're working on, where they are in progress, what exciting new thing they're thinking about. That can lead to some of those fortuitous conversations that we know are important. So we think neighborhoods is a really smart strategy. And then finally, having said that, with workers having more autonomy and choice, there's a reciprocal responsibility to each other. If I have sort of mastered my own destiny about when I come to the office or not, it's really still on me, though, to make sure and check in with my teammates to agree about when we should be coming into the office to spend time with each other, when those important meetings are happening, what sort of things I should be working on in tandem with someone else or on my own, that if I have something that Eric needs to finish doing Eric's task, it's my responsibility to make sure I'm coordinating well with Eric and he can expect to get that from me when I said I would have it done. So we have a lot of responsibility to the people that we're interdependent with, and we have to live up to our contribution to that thing to make it all work. So with more choice comes more responsibility, and that can be helpful to have very much more sort of explicit conversations about what does the team to agree to, which is sort of what we say in the lower paragraph around setting expectations and setting agreements. And so those of you that have not contemplated, or thinking about how this could all work when you come back, I think it's these sorts of things that become ways for it to feel like it could work, because we're encouraging and even facilitating teams to have those conversations, to make those agreements, so that it's not just my goodness, I don't really know how this is going to play out. We can start to shape and be more deliberate and intentional about how it plays out. The third topic that I forgot to mention earlier is, again, this idea around space. I mentioned that it's going to be challenging at first to figure out how much space we need. I don't know that it's necessarily less, but let me give you an example of something we've been talking about recently with a couple different clients. Using that same format, I sort of, you heard me say this earlier, we think there's sort of three categories of space, three fingers: solo, team, and community. This notion of solo is things I do by myself. That could be my desk. It could be another spot where I can, sit in a chair and turn my back to the world and look out the window and do some things by myself that isn't at a desk. So those kinds of spaces that are meant for my individual focused heads down work when I'm in the office. Team spaces, I think we've sort of tended to overlook this. Team spaces to us are those types of meeting spaces or project rooms or file areas or whatever it is that are sort of shared, but mostly by a particular team, not with the world, not with the whole organization. If my team are product development teams, then that project room or that area where I keep prototypes or we're doing mock-ups of where we are in the developmental process for that new product, that's a room the team needs that other people might be invited to, but it's definitely within the team's domain, within that neighborhood I described a bit earlier. And so this is a different way to think about space. And then you add the piece that I said earlier too about, like, is collaboration and the things that people come in to do as a team going to sort of be a bigger piece of the way the floor plan is made up. And we used to, for example, probably give over almost 80% of a floor plan to solo seats, and the last 20% was conference rooms and small meeting rooms and things. I think we're going to see that change, and it may be more like 50-50. It may even be more like 30-70. I think those proportions are going to change, but we don't really know. So how do we hedge, right? We're going to have to watch those things, and we'll kind of tie all this together in a minute here. But to kind of reiterate that there's a way, again, to break it down into manageable chunks, figure out what your solo space strategy is, figure out what your team strategy is, figure out what community spaces still seem really relevant, and what you think the capacity of those spaces needs to be. There are ways to get after this, even though it feels like a bunch of unknowns. It is, but there are ways to get after it. Then we kind of get to the second piece, which is this notion of, I'm telling you, there's a ton of uncertainty. We don't really know exactly what we need to do day one. And even if we think we know, I'm kind of guessing it may not be perfect. It may not be right, because we're all going to be experimenting. We're all going to be showing up in a sort of different way than what we used to show up in and assume we needed to be in the office all day long. That's going to have some impact on again, what I just said, space and things. And we may find that it takes a couple months or longer for those patterns, those new patterns, to form and to sort of shake out. So we think it's important to build in adaptability, to be able to try to figure out how to add physical flexibility and to make sure the workers understand all of this, so that as some of those patterns shake out, the space can continue to be adjusted in some ways to whatever this new reality is. And then we're going to make the argument that even though we need that now in terms of this sort of shakeout period, if you will, I think businesses have always needed this. We tend to build things, especially if you're leasing instead of owning. We don't want to spend any more money after we made the initial investment. We try not to change anything too major, and incur a new capital expense. I think we're going to have to get past that and think about it differently. And some of the CRE firms we're talking to are thinking about this as well and looking for ways to sort of change it up so that we can keep trying to make the space keep up with the speed of business. Some examples of ways to try to create that physical flexibility. And I understand that what I'm going to show you is much more relevant in a building you own instead of one you're leasing. But this idea of almost creating a modular approach. For example, when we do this, we're trying to identify all the circulation patterns we want to keep intact. And then we're sort of looking at, is there a consistent size across this particular floor plan, for example, that lets us imagine we could create similar sized modules that then sort of give us this plug and play idea. We'll show you what we mean in a second. So it's a way of thinking about space and trying to, break it into smaller digestible chunks, realizing again that I could lift one module out if it turns out I have too many solo seats and plug in a module that has more collaborative spaces in it. So here's 3 examples. that basically show you one could be devoted just to solo seats, one could be devoted to a sort of combination of some solo seats and some open meeting spaces, and another could be, predominantly some open meeting spaces and some larger enclosed rooms, and then some smaller meeting spaces. So in that same 30 by 30 module, there's all these different options. And again, and I appreciate I'm making this seem overly simple. We try to make sure power is always coming into the same place. We try to use the same strategy to think about not having to do too much construction changes with HVAC or lighting fixtures and things like that. But how can we create this sort of platform that gives you way more flexibility than ever before? You'll notice that all the walls are of the same kind of panel size so that we can sort of take them apart and put them together in different combinations. Think Legos. So there's Legos on the scale of what's in the module. There's Legos on the scale of each of these modules being roughly the same size. And then if we play that out further, some of those other sorts of clusters that aren't just workstations become great boundaries between neighborhoods, become great buffers between groups that may be noisy or quiet, give us a chance to really think about what is helpful to have nearby. And that's why we have this third category called community, which are spaces that, like training or the cafe, that make a lot more sense to be centralized. So I know I'm kind of going quickly over this, but just want to plant the seed that there are ways to try to build in a flexibility that lets us hedge a bit, because we aren't going to be sure that we have it right the day we go back to the office. Just one last thought too, that I think this is a great quote. It's from a professor at MIT that thinks a lot about the combination between management behavior, worker behavior, and space, and says, we shouldn't think of it as a means to an end. It's a way for the employee experience to be enhanced. It's a resource. It's not an entitlement. It's not, whatever else we kind of think about it as. It should be a way of us supporting the nature of the work that needs to happen. Our fourth topic, and I'll be wrapping up here shortly, is the idea of resiliency. We've all gone through a lot. You saw a lot of the quotes at the beginning that really tell us a lot about some of the very real challenges we've had. And frankly, again, the notion I said already about burnout is basically making the case that we've been having issues with that for a very long time, and it's been a chronic problem. But like a lot of other things, the pandemic just made it that much more obvious, and frankly, that much worse, or worse, whatever the right way to say that is. So how do we understand this whole topic? You've also heard a lot thrown around wellness. That's one of the things that's being written a lot about. It's great that it is, but we sort of want to raise your consciousness a little bit and suggest that there are some topics under this category that need organizational solutions that aren't just the personal responsibility of the workers to do good self-care. Burnout has organizational level issues. You can see here from the upper section, the things that cause burnout. These are from scientists that study this pretty closely. This is considered pretty comprehensive list of the reasons for burnout, the causes for burnout. And you can see that an awful lot of it has to do with how management manages, how the organization does its work, how they, create this contract with their employees. And the things that have happened, as you can see when you read this list, are very much the things that are exacerbated by what we've been going through the last year, like workload. There's a number of people that have obviously expressed that their workload has only increased. They have, it seems, little control over their daily existence. And you throw in things like childcare and elder care and other sorts of things, and oh my God, it's just this amazing pressure to try to manage it all. We all know that connection has suffered. And so we go back to the rationale for the stuff we talked to you about in terms of social cohesion and how important that is. It's really hard to sustain social cohesion when we aren't in each other's physical presence, when we don't have those what are called weak touches or weak ties that let us just pass each other in the hall and meet eyes and wave and say hey and just know that we're sort of on the same team again. So I've got a quote here. It's kind of long-winded, but I hope you've had a minute to read it. And there's a whole really good series about burnout on the Harvard Business Review's website. There's a series of 6 articles and interviews and infographics and other things that sort of explain this whole topic and give you recommendations for what to do about it, but a lot of the things they're recommending are to fix these 6 things in essence. Like try to figure out how to reduce workload, try to add things around again about more control. And so I go back to distributed work, giving us autonomy and control. That's a good thing. That helps us feel like we're more in control of our work life. That's a good thing. The fairness thing we talked about under social cohesion. So all of these could really help us get smarter as organizations and get more intentional again about what we're trying to do to prevent burnout, because it's a really serious issue. And for anybody that wants to talk about productivity, we said social cohesion. Burnout is one of the things that social cohesion helps to negate. There's less burnout when social cohesion is strong. And again, you see it show up in things like the lack of fairness. So the second topic in the same kind of theme is psychological safety. You've probably read a lot about that. It's been on everybody's lips during the pandemic. It again comes from having a culture of trust, again, highly related to social cohesion. If you remember Maslow, sorry for all these references that you may wish to forget, but if you remember Maslow, it's a pyramid, and the basic premise is you can't get to self-actualization until you've met the most basic of things. You can't advance up the pyramid to higher level things if you haven't met the most basic of things. And so psychological safety has, really come home to roost in the pandemic, because we literally don't feel safe going outside or, being too close to other people, or, listening to the guy next to us cough on the bus, that's very disconcerting these days. And so this whole idea is, how do we help people to feel that psychological safety? And again, that's something the organization and team cultures really need to take some responsibility for, because it's on this larger kind of groups of people I interact with where my psychological safety is either reinforced or undermined. And again, there's some quotes here. It's from the same series, but you'll notice that things like in that paragraph, trust, curiosity, confidence, really help us to be more effective. The minute we're in a hugely stressful situation and don't feel safe, we tend to shut down, and we may get some stuff done, but we tend not to think creatively. We tend not to be innovative. We tend not to sort of go outside the box. So it really affects our ability to be effective when this stuff lingers. And finally, wellness. And here again, there are certainly aspects of this that are my responsibility and my job to take care of myself. I have responsibility here, but again, so does the organization. And there's ways for both things to be true. So we'll give you some information here about involving them, and having them even be a part of the discussion around what our wellness strategy is as an organization, and making it okay to ask for help and to know what my resources are to get that help, because that's a big barrier to people going to get the help they might need. Really recognizing again that it's a huge measure, it's a huge contributor to performance. We can give you a bunch of the science about that. It has to do with, again, back to sort of psychological safety, but also mental cognition. And there's some really good programs out there. That's again on sort of the right side of the page, like the LEAD thing that helps us understand how to create good environments in the building, like, indoor air quality and things like that. But the WELL program, if you haven't heard of it, you start to see commercials about it right now, really gives us great information about nutrition, hydration, all those sorts of things. And again, shouldn't be done something we do after we've thought about the space. It should be something that's very much integrated into not only our workplace strategy around spatial things, but how management sets up programs, policies, expectations, unwritten rules that, affects everybody's daily existence. So that's what we wanted to cover today, give you a sense of sort of these 4 different topics and sort of how they've been shifting and, potentially ways to think about it in a way that we hope is helpful to you. If you want to explore it in more detail, feel free to contact us through Staples. They know how to find us. And I want to just end up with some resources on these topics. There are a series of articles or information that kind of cover some of the stuff we've been talking about this morning, and we'll through Staples try to make available to you so that you have other places to look for some of the things that have been discussed today. Thank you very much for your attention. I know we're going to open up to a live Q&A discussion here shortly. Please, if you've got questions, there's going to be an opportunity for us to try to answer based on what you've just heard. But thank you again for watching this. Thank you again for being a part of this program, and we look forward to talking to you live in just a few minutes. Appreciate it.